edition of Time Pass with the New Indian Express. I'm Kaveh Bamza, your host, and today I have with me Ashwin Sanghi, who's just written yet another bestseller, The Vault of Vishnu, which comes in his Bharat series, which began with The Razabal Line, one of my all-time favorite thrillers. Hi, Ashwin.
It's always a pleasure to get to spend some time with you because not only do you follow my work, but I also follow your work.
Thank you.
So this is a wonderful discussion that we are having. As far as these uncanny connections,
Yeah.
honestly speaking, sometimes I wish that I wouldn't be proved right,
Yeah.
because when I wrote the Rosabal Line, which was my very first novel,
Yeah.
I had no idea that the 26/11 attacks were going to happen, yet I was talking about a possible attack of
Right.
that nature. And when I wrote The Vault of Vishnu, I knew that it was going to be based upon science and technology in China.
Right.
But I never realized that these events would unfold later.
Yeah.
So sometimes I really wish that I wasn't proved right, it's a little spooky, a little eerie.
But to get so many of the details right as well, even in Razabal, the fact that it would happen with a ship, and it would happen
Yeah.
by sea, and it would happen with a form of LET, and here as well,
Yeah,
that there's
so
this
there-
potion and
so I could land myself into a lot of trouble because one could very well turn around and say, hey, listen, what do you have something to do with all of this? So let's just leave it at this, that probably I think to a certain extent, Kaveri, what happens is that you have fact which influences fiction,
yeah,
and then that very fiction then tends to influence fact again, and
right,
it's that endless cycle which goes on. So I think when I was talking about probably the biotech labs of China and the
yeah,
vault of Vishnu,
yeah,
probably I must have been influenced by existing stuff that was already out there in the public domain.
right,
Just that now it's come sort of back to bite us in some
yeah,
ways. So
yeah.
it's pretty much that vicious cycle.
Let's talk a little about India and China. Two great rivals, but also we've had such a history. We've shared such a long history. Talk a little about that, because your book gives us a fabulous insight into that.
Well, I mean, these are two great empires more than anything else, and um, there has been so much of an exchange. And it's not been a one-way exchange; it's been a two-way process in that sense.
Yeah,
Uh, for example, I mean, when I hadn't even thought about the vault of Vishnu,
yeah.
the thought came to me when I was just uh, stirring a spoonful of sugar into my
Sugar.
chai,
I know, it's
and
amazing.
I
Yeah,
realized that, hey, listen, both chai and chini are both words of, which show us the connection of China
yeah.
to something as simple as that.
Hmm.
And I found it very interesting that, I mean, when the travelers Huanzhang came to India, and he was wanting to travel to Nalanda.
Right,
Along the way, he experienced these very sweet and hard candies
right,
which he hadn't ever tasted before. And
right,
so he made up his mind that he would carry them back for the emperor,
right,
because he had left China without approval, without official permission from the emperor. So in
right.
order to sweeten his return, he took back this candy for
Yeah,
the emperor, which means that he wasn't exposed to the taste of sugar at that given point of time.
right.
Yet we find that in the 18th century, the very first sugar processing unit that comes up in West Bengal, in Achipur, is actually set up by a Chinese immigrant.
Right.
So, which means that the idea traveled and then again traveled
Coming
back in
back.
some form.
Yeah.
You see the same with Buddhism. I mean, you have the White Horse Temple in Loyang, which is created in order to mark the spot where two Buddhist monks from India came to China along with some of the original manuscripts from Buddhism,
Right.
and they spent the next several years translating them into Mandarin.
Hmm.
And all these manuscripts were loaded on a white horse, and that's why it's called the White Horse Temple. And you can see also two structures, which are the houses which were built for these monks,
Right.
where they lived. So and of course, from China, Buddhism then traveled to the rest of the world.
Right.
Think about something like the world of martial arts. I mean,
Yeah.
when you travel to Shaolin,
Yeah.
and it's so interesting because one of the statues at a very prominent location in Shaolin, in the monastery of Shaolin, is the statue of Bodhidharma. And
Yes.
of course, if you ask any average Chinese person about Bodhidharma, they know exactly who he is. But
Right.
in India, if you ask people about Bodhidharma, they don't know too much. They
Right.
think that I'm referring to the Buddhist faith,
Right.
Bodhidharma.
Right.
That's what they think Bodhidharma is, but it's
Right.
actually a Pallava prince who
Right.
traveled to China and then landed up in Shaolin and wanted admission out there. And the abbot of Shaolin thought of this man as a very wild and unruly sort, and so he did not grant him admission.
Hmm.
And then he was so obstinate that he sat outside the monastery in a cave for 9 years in meditation.
Right.
Then finally, 9 years later, the abbot had to grant him admission. And when this monk went back into Shaolin, he taught the other monks the routine that he had developed in
Right.
order to keep his body moving, in order to keep his circulation going, in order to keep his muscles flexible.
Right.
And that was actually a combination of Silambam, Kalaripayattu, and yoga and yogic breathing.
Amazing.
And that came to be known as Kung Fu. So,
Right.
I mean, if you really think about it, and unfortunately nowadays it's no longer fashionable to talk about the India-China exchange.
Yeah.
We only seem to be exchanging viruses. But the fact of the matter is that these two empires have had some wonderful exchanges during history.
And there's so much talk about revivalism currently. Oh, we were the best in the past, and we had everything from the computer, from the internet to the zero. Yet, there's not enough study of it as you have done, and actually doing more to popularize the idea that India was the repository of so much knowledge and wisdom. Isn't that a better way of negotiating the present?
Absolutely, Kaveri. But the problem is that we have such a highly politicized divide.
Yeah.
And maybe this is not specific in India, but probably it exists in pretty much every country these days.
Right.
And that divide is that on the one hand, you have people who say that, listen, nothing relevant
Right.
came from ancient India, and
Right.
that you guys are living in the past, and you've got faded glories, and you need to live in the present and the future. And the present and the future does not belong to India.
Right.
You may have had a glorious past, but frankly, you're just living on your laurels.
Right.
There is the other segment which turns around and says, everything that was great had
Yeah.
already been discovered in India.
Yeah.
I mean, the Wright brothers didn't discover aviation. It was from the times of the Ramayana with the Pushpak Viman.
Yeah.
Now, the problem is getting those two extremities to meet
Yeah.
is very, very difficult.
Right.
So, to my mind, the answer lies somewhere in between, as all things do.
Yeah.
The pendulum swings one way and it swings to the other extreme, but eventually has to settle somewhere in the middle.
Right.
So, to my mind, the answer was that, okay, if I could actually popularize some of these notions, some of these ideas, some of these concepts through the medium of popular fiction.
Yeah.
And I understand that I'm not a historian, I am not a scholar, I am not a theologian. So in that sense, I can only write my paperback novels. I'm a cheap paperback writer. I'm a Burger King or a McDonald's of the literary world, as it were. So in that sense, because I'm writing and operating in the world of commercial fiction,
Yeah.
it's no skin off my back to put the idea out there.
Yeah.
And say, now, guys, if you consider yourselves to be serious scholars,
Yeah.
then why don't you dig deeper into
Exactly.
what I'm writing?
And by the way, we love Burger King, so it's all right. That at least those kept us alive during the lockdown, if nothing else.
Absolutely.
The fine dining restaurants were all shut.
All
So,
shut.
but Ashwin, to come back to this point, the other point that always strikes me is, the way you portray our security establishment.
Yeah.
It is riven, it is divided, and you have the political establishment, you have the raw, you have army, and I love the way you've managed to portray the rivalries and the intricacies of that relationships so beautifully in this and in Walter Vishnu.
But the reason for that is that politics tends to dominate everything.
Yeah.
I mean, I would never have written a novel like Chanakya's Chant if I
Exactly.
didn't believe that.
Right.
That politics over thousands of years has not changed.
Yeah. Your
and
Chandni is an amazing woman, no?
uh, uh, frankly, most of the Bharat series novels tend to have a preponderance of amazing women.
Yeah. Even
but
here.
I guess to a certain extent, there is a part of me which maybe we'll talk about it later.
Yeah,
There is a part of me which sort of believes that the only real form of energy is Shakti.
Yeah.
And so to a certain extent, that comes across in the Bharat series books.
Right. Yeah. But sorry, to
Kavi,
get back to the...
I just want to labor this point a little more,
Yeah.
Kaveri, that as far as the politics of the security establishment is concerned,
Yes.
it is no different to the politics of any establishment.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you see it playing out in commercial spaces, you see it playing out in the world of politics itself, in the world of economics, in the world of geopolitics, in the world of international negotiation. That political rivalry is across sectors. So when I was writing the Vault of Vishnu, I thought to myself, is this going to be an ideal world where everyone is on the same side? No, it's rarely ever that. Everyone is on opposite sides and everyone has hidden agendas.
Right.
And that's what I love about writing the sort of books I do, because the characters are gray. I mean, I've always loved watching crime thrillers where till the end you don't know who's good and who's bad. I mean, that's wonderful because that's human nature, which is gray.
Yeah, but I think Pam Khurana is all good. The heroine. She is a lovely person and she really does want to get to the truth. Talk a little about her. She's so fascinating. The daughter of a former army officer.
The thought I had really, Kaveri, was that, there are so many people like this who are... When I write my thrillers, what I realize is that what people actually want is a great protagonist.
Yes.
But the protagonist only becomes great because of the sort of challenges that they are confronted with.
Yeah.
So if you can actually take a person who has just been dropped by a helicopter into a burning house, I mean, and then you sort of paint that person into that corner where it's totally beyond them as to how they are going to get out of that situation.
Right.
And so when I'm looking at a protagonist character, I'm always looking for a character where I feel that this is almost beyond that person, where the challenge is beyond that person.
Right.
Because that when they actually solve that problem, then it seems almost like it makes that character that much more endearing.
Exactly. Because
and so it's not about Pam really. It's about all the situations that Pam is put into.
Right. And each more, intricate than the other. The other point, which of course brings me to the point that we were making earlier about the powerful women in your books and how much that has to do with your belief in Shakti.
So to my mind, I mean, Kaveri, see, for me, Shakti is a vital part of my life. And I'm holding up my wrist. It has 5 dhagas on it.
Right.
And these are 5 dhagas which are representative of 5 women in my life.
Tell me who's who.
So the 5 women in my life, of course, my mother.
Yeah.
And had it not been for my mother, I would have remained a baniya businessman, running his dhanda, as it were.
Wow.
But it was because of her that I that I had this entire fascination with reading.
Right.
So it was my mom who actually got me started in reading, and
Okay.
then of course my grandfather took off
Right.
from there. Uh, the second person who is very relevant to me is my sister, my elder sister. She's 7 years older to me, and she is one who always told me that, listen, Ashwin, don't worry about what the world says about you. Do
Yeah.
what you want to do, and
Right.
then you will find that you're actually good at it.
Right.
Um, the third person is actually my wife,
Good.
Anu, because when I had done the research on the Rosabal line,
Yeah.
and I had reached a point where I had mountains of research and I didn't know what to do with it. She
Yeah.
said, "You're an absolute idiot. You need to write a story on this."
Right.
She's the one who put the laptop in front of me and said, "Write."
Okay.
So I would never have got started with that entire process had it not been for her.
Right.
The fourth is my Rakhi sister,
Hmm.
and she is someone who is almost 7 or 8 years younger to me, and she gives me that mischievous streak in my life,
Hmm.
which allows me to sort of almost indulge her perpetually. And it's that, I will sometimes share story ideas with her. I'll say, "Oh, how would you deal with this?"
Right.
And so that is the fourth Shakti in my life. And then, of course, the fifth is Ma Saraswati herself, because very often when I read the pages that I write, I wonder that, did you really write this, Ashwin? Or, because this doesn't sound like you.
Right.
Or how did you even end up thinking like this? Because this is way beyond you.
Huh.
So that's the moment when I realized that ultimately it's all at the feet of Ma Saraswati.
Yeah.
So these are the five Shaktis of my life. And they have been extremely important to me, because from the time that I started writing the Rosabal line,
Yeah.
I realized one thing, which was that, we tend to think in of the world in dualities, in terms of opposites. So
Right.
we think that light and dark are opposites, but darkness is not the opposite of light, it's the absence of light.
Yeah.
Heat and cold. Cold is simply the absence of heat.
Right.
Or, for example, wise and foolish. Foolishness is simply the absence of wisdom.
Yeah.
So, in that sense, when I look at the concepts of Shiva and Shakti,
Yeah.
or the concept of male and female,
Yeah.
to my mind, the way I visualize it is that male is simply the absence of female energy.
Right.
So the men of this world, simply because we've not been endowed with that much Shakti, that's why we've ended up as the male form.
Right.
So then you don't think of them as dualities, you don't think of them as opposites,
Right.
which means, in other words, that if you are worshipping energy, you have to worship Shakti.
It's so wonderful. And I wanted to ask you, how did a boy who studied in what? Where did you go to school? You went to
I
St.
was
Xavier's
in Cathedral
college.
School in
Cathedral.
Bombay.
So very South Bombay,
Absolutely.
very Tony, very sort of
Absolutely.
what is considered deracinated. And here you are. You possibly know more about our ancient texts and our ancient mythology than most supposedly, pundits of this kind of thing. So, how did that transformation happen, Ashwin?
Well, Cathedral School, Xavier's College, all of that was going on in any case.
Yeah.
But, I have always, when I was right now researching the vault of Vishnu, I came across a very interesting little piece of information about the great merchants and businessmen of Samarkand. And Samarkand, of course, was very famous along the Silk Road.
Right.
And when a new baby boy was born in the family, they had this tradition of touching a drop of honey to the tongue and a drop of glue to the palm.
You mentioned that, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And the reason for that was they wanted that the boy should grow up to be a great merchant,
Yeah.
who had a very sweet tongue, who would be able to sell pretty much anything to anyone.
Right.
And would also have a sticky palm so that coins
would stick to it.
Correct. So I found that very fascinating, because I grew up in a Banya Marwadi environment. My mother is a Banya, my father is a Marwadi. So it's a deadly, well, as it's a deadly combination, as as they would say in Gujarati, probably a deadlow combination. Uh, but so the point was that uh, uh, when I grew up, I think the entire focus was that he's going to go into the world of business.
Right.
The entire planning was to focused and oriented towards the world of business.
Right.
And I have often joked that, in many homes, when a child is born, then you would have a tradition of either having a Bhagavad recitation, or maybe a part from the Ramayana, or maybe a verse from the Quran is recited. Whereas in Marwadi Banya households, there are two magic words, debit and credit. And as one goes in the left ear and one goes in the right ear. And as long as that child knows the words debit and credit,
he's
probably
fine.
worth something in his life, So my education was going on. And in parallel with that, I used to go to my dad's place of work, where I used to be taught accounting and all of that. But
what was the business, Ashwin?
So the business, the Sanghis, if you go around anywhere in the world, not the world, India, if you go around India, you'll always find that there's some Sanghi who's selling cars or automobiles or auto parts.
Okay.
And that was the traditional business which was started sometime in the 1920s by my Dadaji from the town of Jodhpur.
Okay.
So, and in those days, of course, the cars were mostly bought by the royal families.
Yeah.
So he would mostly sell to the royal families in the 1920s and 30s. So growing up in that business environment, the one constant factor besides the world of business was my maternal grandfather, my maternal granduncle, actually.
Right.
Who was very fond of reading.
Right.
And he would send me a book every week to read.
Oh, lovely.
And during his lifetime, he sent me a little over 300 books.
Super.
And every time he would send me a book, he expected in return a letter from me explaining what I had read, why I liked it or disliked it.
What great training.
And that I didn't realize it at that time, Kaveri, but my brain was getting rewired in some way.
Absolutely.
So even when I went on for an MBA, because I had to go at the right age, everything had to be right. Right.
And you went to Yale, right?
I went to Yale. So the right school, the right college, the right MBA degree, the right age to get it, the right age to get married, the right number of kids. I mean, everything was
everything was right.
Everything was predetermined and right, and it was utterly boring. But the point was that when I came back and I got into the world of business, there were people who were saying, don't waste your time reading books. Instead focus on bookkeeping rather than book reading. And if you have to read, then use your time to read a balance sheet. Don't waste your time with reading books. I would go back to my Nanaji. I called him Nanaji, even though he was my granduncle. And he would say that, beta, remember one thing, you are from a business family. You will always have Lakshmi in your life. Right. But remember one thing, if your target also is Lakshmi, then the short way of getting Lakshmi is by going after Saraswati. Because Lakshmi is always curious as to where Saraswati is. So if Saraswati comes into this room, then Lakshmi wants to be in this room. If Saraswati gets up and leaves, then Lakshmi also gets up because she's curious about where Saraswati is gone.
Right.
He said the short way of targeting Lakshmi is by targeting Saraswati.
Right.
And of course, in our Hindu pantheon of gods and goddesses, the only deity who can sit between Lakshmi and Saraswati is Ganesh. And so, which probably explains why Ashwin looks the way he does. Because there has been this wonderful objective of sitting like Ganesh between these two deities, these two Devijis. So in that sense, a lot of the hard wiring in terms of philosophy, history, archaeology, science, probably even things like, for example, political viewpoints coming from sources as diverse as, let's say, the Arthashastra or the Prince. All of this was happening because of Nanaji, because I was getting exposed to material which was way ahead of my time.
Right. And I mean, how wonderful. Who knew that, you would one day become a best-selling writer?
Absolutely.
Is he still around?
No,
Oh,
he died the year I came back after my MBA, which was 1993.
oh, he would
So,
have been so
but
proud of you.
even when I was an MBA student in the US for 2.5 years, even at that time, his books used to follow me to the US.
Amazing. He would have been so proud of you, right?
Oh, absolutely. If you see most of my books, you'll find that in the acknowledgement section,
Yeah.
I talk about two gentlemen. One is Ram Prasad Gupta and one is Ram Gopal Gupta, my grandfather and my maternal granduncle. And both of them, I continuously always, the last line of the acknowledgement says that, they are the ones who actually move my pen.
Right.
So,
I want to take you back to your first book, not only because of my association with Kashmir, but also because it tells you so much about how truth can sometimes be too powerful for people to take. It's just truth
sure,
is too much sometimes. And,
sure.
the idea that Christ came and lived in India and Razabal Shrine was his tomb, not everybody finds that palatable, right?
Absolutely. So I mean, if you really think about it, when I was, I got exposed to it because of there was a family wedding happening in Kashmir,
Right.
and this was a very, very dear friend of my father's. It was a time of the lockdown, and I was told that, listen, you have to somehow get there, and you
This
have
is
to attend
another lockdown, not
another lockdown.
yeah.
Exactly. We are
Kashmir
talking.
is so
Yeah.
used to it.
So we are talking about the early 2000s,
Yeah.
2000, 2001. And I was staying at what used to be the Oberoi Palace,
The Lalit now, yeah.
which is now the Lalit. And of course, at that time, the main part of the hotel had been completely shut down. Only the annex
Right.
was operating, where about 10, 15 rooms
Yeah.
had been specifically opened up for the guests who were coming for the wedding.
Right.
And at that point of time, my flight the next day, which I was supposed to take, had got cancelled. So I had one full extra day in Srinagar. And, Srinagar was like a ghost town.
Yeah.
And it became very difficult to just sort of contain myself. Now, when I think about containing myself for 60 days inside my house,
Yeah.
it seems like a lot, but this was in a very dark and dungeony sort of space. So I told my driver, I said, get me out of this place and just take me to any interesting place.
Right.
So he said, have you been to Hazrat Bal? I said, yes, I've been to Hazrat Bal. He says, should I take you to Shankaracharya? I said, no, I've already been to Shankaracharya. So, I mean, because my family had a tradition of spending every summer in Kashmir.
Okay.
So I mean, I'd been there 15, 20 odd times. So, most of the Chashma Shahi and everything I'd seen.
Yeah.
So he said, no, but have you been to Rozabal?
Yeah.
So I said, no, but I've not been there. Now, what is this?
Yeah.
So he took me to Rozabal.
Right.
And at that time, of course, the entry and exit from Rozabal was very normal.
Yeah.
So I went in there, and of course, apparently, what I was told by the driver is that everyone says that this could be the final resting place of Isa. And that the person buried here is someone called Yuz Asaf, who came here and also helped with the construction of the steps leading up to the Takht-e Suleiman, which is also Shankaracharya.
Shankaracharya, yeah.
And Yuz Asaf literally translates to leader of the healed,
right.
which possibly could be Jesus Christ.
Right.
And outside the tomb, of course, there is this metallic plate which shows a pair of human feet with little marks indicating where the nails of crucifixion would have been hammered.
Right.
And of course, the person buried there is this 13th, 14th century Muslim Pir, Nasiruddin.
Right.
But the tomb, of course, the records have referred to this tomb having stood there from 124 AD, so 2000 years ago. And there's an earlier burial, which is not an Islamic burial, but a Jewish burial. So my dear friend Amish Tripathi said one thing very interesting to me once. He said, Ashwin, do you really think that you go out looking for stories? Or do stories come looking for you?
To you? Yeah.
And
yeah,
this was one of those situations where, I mean, I was the most unlikely person in that particular place.
Yeah.
And I got obsessed by that story.
Right.
And so because I got obsessed by that story, I started researching into it. I had no intention of writing a book.
Right.
No bloody intention of writing a book at all. My intention was basically to try and dig out dig out some elements of the story and probably find connections between them.
Right.
So I found the very interesting connection of a boy who had come and studied at a Buddhist monastery. And this had been written about by Nicholas Notovich, a Russian explorer. And the boy called Isa had come and studied under Buddhist masters in the monastery of Hemis in Ladakh. So all of this was, I was wondering, could this be connected?
Yeah.
Could there be a connection between Abraham and Brahma? Could there be a connection between the lost tribes in India? Could there be a connection between, there was, it was all swimming around in my head.
Yeah.
And eventually I ended up writing this thesis, as it were. It was a 40-page document where I tried to connect all the dots.
Right.
And I gave it to Anu, my wife, to read. And I said, what do you think of it? And she said, Ashwin, I think you've discovered the cure for insomnia, because it's so boring. It is so boring. Who's going to ever read this? She said, why don't you take this material and make it into a story?
Right.
And that's when the Rosabal line happened. But what I didn't realize is that the Rosabal line would then be picked up as a reference for the Lonely Planet guide.
Yes. And that
that
is what
changed
is
things.
fascinating.
Yeah. So it and the Lonely Planet out of nowhere. And by the way, this book was a self-published book. The Rosabal line had been rejected by 47 agents and publishers. So I had self-published the book under the title The Rosabal Line.
But it was a pseudonym, right?
Sean Higgins.
Yeah.
So Lonely Planet then goes along to say that the Rosabal Shrine is also purported to be the final resting place of Jesus Christ. And it, as has been referenced in the thriller by Sean Higgins called The Rosabal Line. Now, I honestly, I don't know how that happened. But the long and short is that a ton of people started landing up at Rosabal and saying that, listen, we want to see the tomb of Christ.
Right.
And apparently that was not palatable to a lot of people,
Yeah.
including the present management and administration, which treats it as a shrine dedicated to Nasiruddin.
Right.
And so as a result of which, I got to know a couple of years later that a lock had been put on the place.
Yeah.
And that further visitor entry had been banned, which was really a shame.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't matter as to whether the person buried there is Yusuf, whether it is Nasiruddin or whether it is both.
Yeah.
In fact, that's what makes that place so interesting.
And that's what makes India so interesting.
So interesting,
it's everything and everyone, So many cultures.
Absolutely. So I think, unfortunately, we have politics happening on pretty much everything these days. And this is one of those where, unfortunately, you can... And I think that's one of the reasons why probably I prefer to dabble in the world of fiction.
Yeah.
Because in the world of fiction, you can't sort of hang me, because I'm simply putting an idea out there and I'm saying, hey, listen, why do you want to explore it? And, that's fine. In case some serious research happens along the way, that's great. But I really do believe that some of those connect. Like, for example, when I was looking at when I was writing the Rosabal line, the idea of this Abraham and Brahma came to me from and it was really one of those crazy moments. It was about 2:00 in the morning, and I was looking at it. I was 2 whiskeys down, and I was looking at this whole thing. And I said, Abraham, what happens if I take the A out of Abraham and put it at the end? And Brahma, and I said, you're just thinking stupidly. Just because you see a stupid connection doesn't make it a connection.
Yeah.
And then I start looking at the fact that the Bible talks about Abraham's wife being Sarah.
Right.
And Brahma's consort being Saraswati.
Saraswati.
And then again, I say, no, but this doesn't prove anything.
Right.
And then I talk about the fact that, the character of Abraham emerges from what is now known as Iran.
Yeah.
Iran, Iraq.
Right.
And the town of Ur.
Right.
So what was in those days Sumeria, ancient Sumeria.
Right.
And where does the word Sumeria come from? Moon, because Soma, Sombar,
right.
Somras, Someria.
Yeah.
So they are moon worshippers.
Yeah.
And Abraham's own father was a creator of deities and idols in honor of the moon. And I begin to think to myself that there were connections between the Indus Valley and Mesopotamia. So isn't it possible that those ideas had moved between one and the other?
Yeah.
But I have no way of proving it, Kaveri. And that's the reason why I write in the world of fiction.
And that's the reason we love you, because you allow us to dream that these things are possible and to put them out there without either being pilloried or lynched or laughed at or all three,
Or
you
all
know.
of the above. Absolutely.
Especially in today's highly charged environment where even something as simple as what you suggested, that the Doklam massacre was much worse than it was actually indicated by the government. Even something as simple as that could actually land you in a whole lot of trouble.
Oh
But
yeah.
it's that which makes your fiction truly, it's actually spine tingling.
When I had just written the Rosabal line,
Right.
I remember, and after it got published in India by Westland, there was a small press meet where one of these young journalists got up and said that, you're a businessman with an MBA in finance. What gives you the credentials to write a story like this?
Hmm.
I mean, it was rather brash, and frankly, now that I look back at it, he was being rather rude with me. At that point of time, I didn't really pick up on that.
Yeah.
So I said that, during my growing up years, uh, my mother used to tell me that I was a bloody good liar, uh, that I could say a lie with a straight face, and you would not pick up on the fact that I was lying. Now, of course, the corollary to that, of course, is that if you're going to tell a lie, then tell the lie as close to the truth as possible,
Possible.
because then it
Never
makes
get
the lie
caught.
that much more believable.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much what I do. I spin yarns,
Yeah.
but the yarns are spun on a bedrock of truth,
Right.
on a bedrock of factual information and research,
Yeah.
because then the yarn becomes that much more believable.
Right.
So, but at the end of the day, make no bones about the fact that I'm a fiction writer.
Yeah.
So please take whatever I say with not a pinch of salt, but a sack full of salt.
Or Chini, if you like.
Absolutely.
We have some questions that have come in for you, Ashwin.
Sure.
One is from Avinash. How much research have you done for each of your books, and how many months and years has it taken? Is there one that took the longest?
So if you really think back, there have been 6 books in the Bharat series, and they've taken 12 years to write.
Right.
So roughly about 2 years a book.
Right.
And out of those 2 years that I spend on crafting a book in the Bharat series, typically the first 9 months to 12 months goes away on research. The nature of the research varies across books. So, for example, the Rosabal line was a ton of reading. So I had read in that period of a year and a half, almost around 40 or 50 books, which were relating to that particular subject.
Right.
Similarly, by the time I started doing Chanakya's chant, it was actually a lot of research into the Arthashastra, the Mudra Rakshas, and the life of the commonality between the Arthashastra and Machiavelli. I mean, those were the 3 broad areas that I wanted to look at. Krishna Ki was actually a ton of travel to places like Mathura, Dwarka, Bet Dwarka, Vrindavan, and so on and so forth, where I wanted to actually pick up on Somnath. Those were locations that I wanted to go to because I wanted little nuggets that I could actually build into the story, which other people may have missed out on.
Right.
When it came down to the Sialkot saga, it was a ton of interviews. It was a ton of interviews with people who had lived through Bombay and Calcutta of the 1950s, 60s, and 70s.
Right.
The toughest research was Keepers of the Kal Chakra, because that I'm not a scientist, and I was dealing with the overlap between spirituality and quantum theory. And I didn't know the first thing about quantum theory. So I had to teach myself quantum theory first. So that was really tough. And then, of course, the Vault of Vishnu, I thank God for the timing of this book, that it happened and it got launched in the beginning of 2020, because all the research happened in 2018-19. And at that point of time, I was free to travel into China, and I was free to spend several weeks there visiting all the places that I wanted to build into the book. Today, that would not have been possible.
Yeah, but that's why it's so eerily, contemporary as well. So, which would you say took the longest?
Keepers of the Kal Chakra.
Yeah. Someone called Ryan has said they call you the Dan Brown of Indian fiction. Have you ever met or wanted to meet him? Does this comparison embarrass you or make you happy? Nice
No, no,
question.
the comparison makes me really happy because, I mean, I'm one of the greatest fans of Dan Brown.
Yeah, who
And
isn't?
I had an opportunity to meet with him about 4 years ago when he was on his Penguin lectures
Ah,
in
yes.
Bombay and Delhi. And the Bombay event was done at the NCPA. And Penguin reached out to me and said that since you are called the Indian Dan Brown, why don't you structure a conversation with him on stage?
Right, right,
Which is what we did. So we
right,
were we were up there on the stage for about roughly 45 minutes.
right.
We spoke about a lot of interesting stuff, and we really hit it off. After that, once the event was over, he was staying at the Oberoi. So he said, "What are you doing for dinner?"
Hmm.
And I said, "Come on, I'll take you to some interesting place within the hotel, and
Right.
we'll sit there and plonk ourselves."
Yeah.
So we plonked ourselves there, and there was a ecosystem around Dan which had also come with him. So about
Right.
4 of those guys, along with Dan, myself, and a couple of people from Penguin. So we
Right.
were about 7 or 8 people, and we had dinner together, and uh, we were a little excessive on the alcohol, and that translated into a evening where then everyone else left, and Dan and I were left up till 2 a.m. in the morning.
Wow.
And we ended up speaking about topics that interest us and stuff that we have, and one of the topics that we ended up talking about was the nature of God. And
Right.
I mean, here you have two paperback writers who completely think in terms of, what is a good commercial story.
Yeah.
And here we are discussing something as abstract as the concept of God.
Yeah.
And probably at about 12:30 or so, he asked me, he said, I talk about in my books the God of the gaps.
Yeah.
And so what is your definition of God? And I said, G is equal to infinity minus K. And I wrote it on a piece of paper and gave it to him. And he said, what does this mean? I said, well, G is God, or what we call God.
Right.
Infinity is the entire universe. Brahmand, the whole Brahmand is infinity. And K is the extent of human knowledge.
Right.
So what we don't know, we attribute to God.
Yeah.
The ancient Egyptians saw the sun rise in the east, set in the west. They didn't know what it was. They said it's Ra, the sun god,
Right.
and he travels across the sky in his chariot. And
Yeah.
when it's night, he's tired and he goes to sleep, and that's why we have darkness.
Hmm.
And later on, of course, Galileo and Copernicus and all of these guys came along and said it's a giant ball of fire.
Yeah.
And we are the planets which go around it.
Right.
And suddenly Ra lost his divine status because now we could explain it.
Yeah.
So that is the very nature of divinity, that what we can't explain. But what fascinates me is that if you take that equation seriously, G equal to infinity minus K, then any equation which has infinity on one side means that the answer will be indeterminate.
Yeah.
And that's what I really love about the concept of God, that there will always be something indeterminate about God. And we suddenly realized that there was an overlap between that concept and God of the gaps.
Right. Amazing, huh? So you really, he's the Ashwin Sanghi of the West, and you're the Dan
No,
Brown of India.
but surprisingly, Kaveri, the next day he called up and he said that, what are you up to? This was after having spent, 4 to 5 hours
Yeah.
previously.
Yeah.
And he said, no, I have a few hours before my flight, so take me around Bombay
Okay.
and show me some interesting places.
Hmm.
So I took him to a few interesting places, which included, of course, the point up to which we could enter for the Tower of Silence.
Okay.
But we were able to at least get a model tour of,
Right.
because I find that is really fascinating.
Absolutely.
So took him there, took him to Babulnath, took him to Haji Ali, took him to St. Thomas's Cathedral, took him to the synagogue and fort, showed him the entrance to the Freemasons.
Wow.
That
I'm
sort of
sure
stuff.
some of it will feature in some book someday.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I guess the Tower of Silence, of all of them, I think that's the most mysterious.
Yeah. And because I ended up doing that, that's the reason why the Tower of Silence then figured in the book that I wrote along with James Patterson in
Right.
2015.
Yeah. Wonderful. We have a question from Vikas Singh. Marvel films, X-Men series, Keepers of the Kal Chakra. Suddenly, quantum physics has become very important. The book has in-depth research. Where did you find the material?
So actually, for those who are interested in this subject, I would strongly recommend reading a book by Fritjof Capra
Uh-huh.
called The Tao of Physics.
Right.
And I ended up reading it because of a dear friend who is an IIT engineer.
Hmm.
And this particular gentleman said that, Ashwin, this is a book which you should consider reading. I did not know the first thing about physics
Hmm.
because, I mean, physics up to 11th, 12th
Yeah.
standard.
Yeah.
That's about it. But I ended up reading it and I realized that I could understand a lot of it. And I instinctively got what he was trying to talk about.
Right. Right.
That maybe some of the rishis and the seers of India were actually talking about pretty much the same thing that quantum researchers are talking about today.
Right.
So I could see that overlap.
Right.
But I realized that the only way that I could explore that was first understand. I had been comfortably exposed to the world of philosophy
Right.
to a very great extent because of my writings.
Yeah.
But the world of quantum theory was alien to me.
Right.
So I needed to actually be able to build up a sort of a foundational research
Right.
so that I could at least navigate the waters.
Yeah.
And that luckily a couple of friends helped me, people who were engineers. And so I went through sort of quantum theory 101, as it were, just to be able to understand the broad principles
Right.
and then see as to how that connects.
Yeah.
So, for example, I mean, to my mind, what is very interesting is the very starting point of quantum theory is from the experiment related to light,
Yeah.
where you have the so-called double slit experiment,
Right.
where a beam of light is shone onto a screen, but through a single slit. And the pattern that you get on the screen is also another single slit because the light has gone through that
Right.
and has eventually reflected on the screen.
Right.
But the moment that you shift the middle screen from a single slit to a double slit, common sense tells you that you should see two slits at the other end.
Right.
Two beams of light
Right.
on the receiving surface. But you don't see two beams, you instead see an interference pattern, which means that light behaves differently the moment that you have a double slit there. Now, why? Because later on, of course, Einstein and various others have told us that light behaves both as a wave as well as a particle.
Right.
And it depends upon the observation.
Right.
So the observer affects the observed.
Right.
And this is at the core of quantum theory.
Yeah.
Now think about this. I was just thinking to myself that we keep talking about our lifetime, and the entire concept of Hindu karma is on the basis of multiple lifetimes.
Yeah.
And those multiple lifetimes may not be sequential, they may be simultaneous
Right.
also. So in that sense, karmic theory is one big glorified mess, as it were.
Yeah.
Because you have lifetimes playing out and you have sequential, parallel, and multi-dimensional stuff going on.
So you're a wave as well as a pattern, particle. Yeah.
And so in that sense, to my mind, what if I was to look at myself as a wave?
Yeah.
Where when I'm in a wave form, then you could call it my soul.
Yeah.
And then from time to time, I manifest in a physical form where I take on particle-like properties.
Right.
And suddenly I realized that there was more to this. There was more meat in this. And so as a result of which that took on an entirely different sort of direction, as it were. I was also very interested with this whole concept of duality and the concept of quantum entanglement, which led me to the idea that if you have, let's say, two particles, two entangled particles, one sitting in New York, one sitting in New Delhi, thousands of miles apart, but they behave exactly the same way. And what explains it? It's what is it? Einstein called it spooky action at a distance.
Right.
Spooky action at a distance, where two particles behave identically, even though miles and miles of space separate them. And if you can have spooky action between New York and New Delhi, then why can't you have it between, let's say, Earth and Venus, or Pluto or Saturn?
Or
Why
in
can't you
David,
have it between the Milky Way and another galaxy?
or in David Dhawan's Judva,
Absolutely.
where you have, but it is actually that you have two heroes having this uncanny connection. One reacts to what the other is feeling.
Other does, exactly. So the point was that once I started looking at that, that led to my thought that, hey, listen, couldn't you have entangled planets? Could you have entangled weather systems, entangled galaxies, and also entangled human beings?
Human beings.
And
it's fabulous, isn't it? There's just so much to learn from you. I have a few more questions. Who do you think would be the ideal characters to play the protagonists in Chanakya's chant if there's a cinematic adaptation? Vikrant.
Okay. I must tell you, this is up close and personal to me, because the one character that I really thought would do a phenomenal job of that character, Gangasagar Mishra and Chanakya, because it would have to be the same actor playing both of them.
Right.
But I always thought it would be an Irfan Khan.
Yeah. He would have been fabulous.
He had that level of earthiness and a rusticality about the guy, a rustic persona, and would have had all the aplomb to be able to pull it off. But beyond that, I had not thought. Possibly, maybe a Manoj Bajpayee could do that. Maybe. At some point of time, people also told me that an Ajay Devgan would be a good idea. But I somehow felt that it would probably be an Irfan Khan. But well, let's see.
And he would have loved playing that as well. He was a great reader. He really enjoyed.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
We have one more question. Right from Vedic times, women have been revered and worshipped. When did the decay start and practices change?
Sure. I think to a certain extent, what we have is, if you really look at it, we've had rishis and munis who have been women.
Yeah.
Even in Rigvedic times,
yes.
You had some of the greatest thinkers as women.
Yeah.
To my mind, the defining point probably comes from around the times of Chanakya, because the first time that you really see this negative approach when it comes down to women is probably during the Mauryan Empire. And we have, unfortunately, the problem is that we have a writing system, the Brahmi script, which came to us only around roughly 300-400 BC. So to a great extent, prior to that, you only had oral tradition.
Yeah.
But when you look at the writings within the Arthashastra, you see the slightly lower position that women have been granted. And in that sense, for all his greatness, Kautilya was a bit of a, well, not a bit of a, he was a bit of a chauvinist in that sense.
Yeah.
And that comes across in his writings rather clearly.
Right.
So if that was the philosophy at that point of time, now of course Chanakya says in his writings that he has compiled it all. He says that there have been many thinkers before him, like for example Brihaspati and several others who have. So many of these things that he is talking about are things that have been passed down the ages. So we could easily say that probably that had existed for a few hundred years before Kautilya came along.
Right.
So it's hazy. The moment you start going back into 2,000-3,000 odd years, and that's one of the reasons why people like Ashwin Sanghi like writing in those time periods, because it's hazy. So we can spin our fiction there.
So, what is the next fiction that you're spinning, Ashwin? What have you been doing during the lockdown? Can you share that with us?
Yeah, I can share in broad
Yeah,
contours of what I've been doing. You know my old habit, which is never to share
of course.
ideas till the
And
time
you
that they
should
come
not.
till they till they come out in print.
Yeah.
But currently, for the first 60 days of this lockdown, actually, I've been working on two projects.
Uh-huh.
The first project was my own, not commissioned by anyone. I wanted to write up a season of a web series,
Oh,
and for a story that I had in my mind.
right.
So I wanted to write out the entire universe for that,
Uh-huh.
and which I did in
Okay.
within the first 30 days.
Wow.
So uh, I have now an entire outline for a season one
Right.
of a particular story that
I
I.
hope Netflix and Amazon are listening to this.
So, so that is now currently sitting with my agent
Huh.
because I clearly see the what I felt at some point of time last year was that ultimately I'm not a writer, I'm a storyteller,
Yeah,
and there is no reason as to why I should be telling my stories only one way. I should
exactly.
I should be open to multiple mediums of
Yeah,
storytelling. So that's what I did for the first 30 days.
right.
Then, as it turns out, there was another client who came along and said, listen, we are working on another series, and we would like you to sort of visualize this. It has a historical element to it.
Hmm.
And so, but at the same time, it needs to be cutting edge and thrillerish, which
Hmm.
is perfectly suited for someone like me.
Yeah,
So I spent the next 30 days actually writing that.
right.
So I got two projects out of the way during
Yeah,
the first 60 days.
right.
Now, presently, I'm going to spend the next 3 months to 3.5 months working on a collaborative project.
Mm-hmm.
Can't tell you what it is,
Mm-hmm.
but it is in the domain of mythology.
Mm-hmm.
I hope to be done with that probably by July or August.
Mm-hmm.
Once I'm done with that, that's when I will start writing up the
Okay.
next book in the
Next.
Bharat series.
Okay.
Uh, but the research for that next book in the Bharat series is going on in parallel. It has been
Okay.
going on for the last almost 4 to 5 months.
Right.
So by the time that I've crossed that barrier of August, that's
Yeah.
the time when I'll actually start plotting it.
How many words do you write a day? Do you have a word limit every day, or?
Not really, because there are. It depends on the phase I'm in. Sometimes there will be more than one project that I'm working on.
Yeah.
Sometimes there will be a situation where I'm not writing anything, but I'm only in the midst of research.
Research.
So there isn't like an average word count.
Yeah.
But what I will say is that typically my early morning hours, anywhere between 5 o'clock and 9 o'clock in the morning, are devoted to writing.
Right.
That could be a lesser word count or a greater word count, depending upon whether I'm in the research stage, the
Right.
plotting stage, or the actual writing stage.
Mm.
Sometimes it could be also used for, because I do a ton of rewriting. So most of my manuscripts go through at least about 5 or 6 rewrites. So,
Really?
yeah.
And that's what you want to do for yourself. Nobody tells you to do this, or?
No, because I'm a bad writer.
Ah.
No, see, and I'm saying this with the greatest of humility, Kavri. I'm a bad writer, and what I am good at is storytelling.
Right.
But I know what my limitations, what my handicap as a writer are. So
Right.
so I try and work on those limitations, and I try and sort them out during the process of the rewrites.
Right.
Not all of them get sorted out.
Yeah.
Uh, thank heavens for the fact that there are so many good editors around me
Right.
who sort of pick up on all my faults and are able to sort of bring it to a condition where readers can appreciate it. But before I can even let it go to the editor, I need to do several rewrites on my own.
Thank you so much. And we wish many, many, many more words to you, Ashwin. It was so lovely speaking to you and learning so much from you. And I think all our viewers must have learned a lot as well. And scary similarities with the contemporary times in the Walter Vishnu. But please, everyone should go out there and read it quickly.
Thank you,
so much.
Kavri. It's been a pleasure to have this conversation with you. And my message to you, as well as to all your viewers, is stay safe, stay happy, stay well, and hopefully we will have an abundance of blessings. To this too shall pass.
Yes. Thank you so much, Ashwin.
You take care. All the
Thank you.
best.
All the best. Bye.
Please like our social media handles and subscribe to our channel by clicking on the bell icon.